Tonight I'm presenting TikTok and a little bit of a play on words, a very popular online platform that people post videos to, but also a very important conversation that we need to be having this spring with regards to some of the things that we've been seeing in Northern Nevada. Back in late February, I actually pulled a tick off of a horse in Washoe Valley area myself. And since then, we've been pulling ticks off of horses. I'm not entirely sure if we've been submitting samples to the lab yet, but I'll go over all of that. And it's something that in my 30 years of being around horses, I personally have never had to pull ticks off of horses. I have pulled ticks off of dogs before, but I think this is something that is really important to talk about, something that we need to be keeping an eye on as we go forward, especially just considering our winters have been a little funny and you can't learn too much about what is out in the environment and how to keep our animals safe and happy. So welcome to TikTok. We're going to be talking about ticks tonight. It's going to be kind of yucky, so get ready for some of these pictures. I tried to keep it as clean as I could because I myself do not care for ticks at all. First of all, I would like to start with a little disclaimer. The information provided in the presentation is for general informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional veterinary or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always be sure you're seeking guidance from your medical and veterinary professionals if you have specific questions regarding your animals or yourself. We're going to start with a bit of an outline to get you guys oriented for what we're talking about tonight. I will give a little introduction on myself, then we'll start talking about ticks. We're going to go into what we know about their life cycle, how they find a host, how they feed, how they transmit disease, and then we'll go into specifics of Northern Nevada ticks themselves, what we need to be looking for when we're doing our inspections for ticks on our animals, how we're supposed to be removing these ticks, disposal of and submitting these ticks for samples to the lab if we are interested in doing so, and then any protective measures and interventions that we should be looking into. So good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Ciara Viola. I have a PhD in neuroscience. I'm the owner and operator of High Sierra Fieldworks in Northern Nevada, and I've been a lifelong equestrian. I am passionate about animal care and client education, which is what's prompting this presentation tonight. Another little bit of background about myself, I have a master's in anatomy and physiology, a bachelor's degree in veterinary science, and I'm a licensed veterinary technician in the state of Nevada. I did have to take a parasitology course during that licensed vet tech degree, and it was one of my least favorite courses I had to take. And then when I started pulling ticks off of dogs back in 2019, I realized how important it was that I took that class. So welcome to TikTok. Tonight, we're gonna jump right in to what ticks are, and let's get started. So ticks, what exactly is a tick? It's an obligate blood-feeding parasite. It has different species that roughly over 900 species worldwide with worldwide distribution. I believe in the United States, I had seen a number of around 200 different subspecies with regards to ticks in the United States, but I don't know the date of that particular source that I had found, so I didn't actually cite it because I'm not sure how accurate it is. However, I pulled this information from Britannica, so I would trust that this is pretty accurate. So lots of different species with regards to ticks. They are not insects. They're related to spiders. So I'm sorry if you're afraid of spiders, but there's more out there than just regular spiders. They are known to be vectors of serious diseases. They really don't have any benefit to our ecology or environment besides spreading disease. And there are 3 specific families that these ticks will fall into. I am not going to try to even pronounce all of the family names because I would probably butcher them. But I do know that they fall into those three main families. We have soft ticks, we have hard ticks, which fall into the majority of the ticks that we're going to be seeing and coming across, especially here in the United States, but also I believe roughly 700 of those 900 species that we see of ticks are hard ticks. And then there is a rare African species of ticks, which I won't even touch on tonight. And honestly, we're not even going to get into soft ticks because there's so many different species of those. We're going to focus on the ones that are going to be affecting us in northern Nevada. So the tick life cycle is very interesting. They have four life stages that they go through. They start out as an egg, and then they become a six-legged larva. They then grow into an eight-legged nymph before they grow into adults. And the way that they go through each of their life stages is by having a blood meal. They acquire pathogens and diseases early on in their life cycle when they are feeding on animals. And what they're known to feed on, especially when they're younger, is going to be small rodents like squirrels and rabbits, chipmunks, and some birds. And then as they get into the nymph and adult stages, they're going to most likely be feeding on larger animals and humans at that time. So they may have a different host at each stage of life. It really depends on the type of tick, if it's a one-host tick or if it's a three-host tick. And like I said, that is species dependent. The one-host ticks usually will progress much faster through their life stages than the three-host tick, because the three-host tick has to find their three hosts prior to being able to move on to their next life stage. This is an example that I pulled from the University of Purdue Cooperative Extension website. And this is an example of a three-host tick and what they go through as they become adults. So primarily the adult female is going to be laying eggs on the ground. That's where we see birds and small mammals are getting into those eggs. We're going to have a larva that's going to feast on a mammal at that time. They're then going to fall off of that host, find their next host, where they become the eight-legged nymph. They're going to fall off of that host before they then are adults and find their final host to feast on. So how do ticks find a host? They are excellent at detecting odors, pheromones. They can even sense body heat, changes in moisture, and they can sense vibration that comes from movement. So what they do is, because they are typically born on the ground or they hatch on the ground, they will wait along grasses and shrubs that are located near well-used paths. That can be a deer path, it can be where the bunnies like to go, it can be where anybody is walking and where they traverse. The ticks will hang out there because they're getting all of those changes in the environment to be able to find their next host. They will wait in what's called a questing position. And this tick over here, with the image that I pulled from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension website, is sitting there on the end of a stick, it looks like, with its front legs outstretched. And what it does is it will sit there and it will wait for something to move past it, and then it will grab onto whatever is moving past. And that is how it will find its next host. So then how are we transmitting disease via these ticks? Well, disease is transmitted through the feeding process. And depending on where this tick attaches to the host, preparing to feed can actually take anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours. I don't know exactly how they measured that. I don't know if it was, a tick that found a horse or a tick that found a dog. But basically, this time is what it takes for the tick to find an appropriate feeding location, or a location that it thinks is sufficient to start feeding. So the tick will attach to the host, And it inserts its feeding tube, and there's a specific name for that, but I didn't include it in here. I believe it's called the capitulum. You can get very scientific when it comes to the bits and pieces of the tick, but mostly what is important to know here is that it has a mouthpiece, and that is what it is inserting into the skin. Some tick species have barbs on their feeding tube that will help them hang into place on the skin. And some will even secrete a substance that kind of concretes them into the skin and that helps them to remain attached as the animal is moving. So the other thing is ticks have an anesthetic property to their saliva, and that is how they're able to not only attach but feed sensationlessly to their host. You can't actually feel them, and oftentimes, even if you're out hiking, some hikers that have ticks attached have no idea that the tick is even on them. They didn't feel the tick, number one, climb onto them, or number two, start feeding. So it's important to note. The meals that these ticks will have can last minutes to days, also depending on the species and depending on the life cycle or the life stage that the tick is in and how large it can become engorged. So what happens here, especially with these younger ticks, is if the host has a bloodborne pathogen, this is how a tick is going to be getting transmission of that pathogen to itself. After a meal, most ticks will drop off of the host and prepare for its next stage of life, unless it's a one-host tick. And then at the next feeding, any acquired pathogens from any previous feedings may be transmitted to the new host. And this information is something that I gather from the CDC itself. The example here on the right is of a 3-host tick that is actually the Western blackleg tick that we'll be talking about a little bit more here shortly. But this tick is also known to live a little bit longer than some because it has to go through all of its life cycles to become an adult. So now let's jump into what sort of ticks we have in Northern Nevada specifically, or the most common ticks that we have, because there are more than just these two, but these are the most common that we're going to be seeing. We have the Western blackleg tick here on the left, and we have the Rocky Mountain wood tick on the right. So that name on the left, the Western blackleg tick, is an Ixodes pacificus tick, and the Ixodes ticks are known to transmit Lyme disease. So these ones are the ones that would have a worse rap than the ones on the right. And the ones on the right, the Dermacenter andersoni ticks, are not known to carry the Lyme disease, but they do have other diseases and bacteria that they will pass on to the host that they're feeding on. So where I grabbed these pictures from is actually from the AAEP guidelines. This PDF, this TICS 2017 PDF, was provided to me by Comstock Equine Hospital, and is a very useful resource. It's got some very good information on what we should be looking for with it when it comes to looking for ticks on our horses, the type of ticks that affect horses, and the sort of diseases that are transmitted to them. I don't go into too much detail on this, but I will provide you with this resource if you're interested in really doing a deep dive on this. But I'm going to actually look at one of the, look a little bit further into these two tick species. The Western black-legged tick, and this is from the Mayo Clinic itself, is mainly found along the Pacific coast, and there's actually an Eastern black-legged tick that wreaks havoc on the East Coast, pretty much from the Midwest over to the East, and very widespread distribution of that particular tick. But this Western black-legged tick is mostly here on the Pacific, not so much in the Ciara per se on the eastern side. However, we're pretty close to Western Ciara in Nevada. So this is one of the common ticks that we do see in our region. These ones are our anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and Lyme disease transmitting ticks. So these guys can be pretty rough if you get bit by one of these. The Rocky Mountain wood tick is mainly found in the West Coast and not so much over to the Pacific coast per se, but it also does affect some of the southwestern states and southwestern Canada. And this tick is known for spreading Colorado tick fever, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and tularemia. So a couple different, you're kind of getting hit with two different things here. I know Lyme tends to be the worst of these particular ailments that the ticks will spread, but looking into the Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tularemia, all of that can also be pretty rough if you get bit by one of these. And we do know that Lyme disease is something that can affect all mammals. So it's just good to be aware that these are the kind of ticks that we're seeing, and these are the diseases that are most associated with these ticks at this time. One of the things that the AAEP website with the ticks link that I have linked a few slides ago is this field guide to ticks. And this is a really neat little interactive tool that I took a couple of screenshots of so we can actually see they've mapped different regions of the United States. So if you're traveling to a particular area, you can go and see what sort of ticks are most active in the time of year that you'll be traveling there. So I used April because we're in April here in Nevada. It looks like that Rocky Mountain wood tick tends to be more active here in our region in April. However, if you were to go on this map and you were to click around to May, June, you would see that actually those Rocky Mountain wood ticks are not as active as maybe say that brown dog tick that I'm not talking about tonight. But you can go on and kind of track and see what time of year these ticks are most active. I did also grab a screen capture of the Pacific coast because a lot of us travel back and forth to California often. And they don't specify exactly where these ticks are found. It's more just regionally. But here's where our Western black-legged tick tends to be more active in April on that Pacific coast. There's also, it mentions Pacific coast tick, American dog tick. So like I said, there's over 200 species here in the United States itself. So it is nice that we at least have two common ones and we're not dealing with like 15 common types of ticks. That way we can track them a little bit easier. But now that we kind of know what the most common ticks are in our region, how are we supposed to be looking for them on our animals? I kind of gauged this presentation to be mostly horse-based and also help equestrians and barn owners kind of know what they need to be doing to mitigate ticks, but I've also included some information on small animals, considering it was requested for me to also include that. And a lot of us take our dogs to the barn. There's a lot of barn kitties that are out there. So that information will be coming. But to start, when we're inspecting for ticks, we need to be looking everywhere for them because even though they have preferred areas that they like to hang out and to feed, they can be found anywhere on the body. So when we're inspecting for ticks on horses, they really like to be in warm, damp areas. They are most commonly found in the groin, under the tail, the armpit area, and under the jawline, especially along the jugular region where we've got nice warm blood supply that's going to and from the head to the body. And the AAEP link also goes into detail on how to do a full, thorough inspection on your horse looking for these ticks. This inspection is known as scratching, and get ready to put your hands all over your horse to look for these things. When I was doing research for this presentation, I actually found a study that was done in 2021 where a group in Oklahoma had done a study for an entire year, and they were looking at some horses. I think they had, I don't remember exactly offhand, but they had a good N number of horses that they were looking at to see if there was a preferred attachment site for feeding on horses in particular. And what they found actually was really interesting. They found less ticks on the head of the horse, less on the neck, but they definitely saw a lot more in the chest and in the abdominal area. But this is for Oklahoma, and I know that that is a very different environment than what we have in northern Nevada, or it can be quite different. But knowing that people are actually doing studies on this is really cool, because I guess if you have a huge herd of horses and you're needing to do a tick check, you can go out and look in those places where they most commonly would have them attached, and you'd be able to do a quick check on them if you have limited time. So neat to see. I don't know if there's any follow-up studies. I wasn't able to find anything on that, but potentially we could be doing our own study this summer, depending on how bad our ticks end up getting. So when we're inspecting for ticks on dogs, we're going to kind of be doing the same thing we're doing with horses, and we're working with a lot less real estate. So these ticks actually also like to be in warm, damp areas, but in addition to in the groin, under the tail, and in the armpit, if your dog is wearing a collar, or you take them out for hikes with jackets, vests, or if they're wearing any other sort of wearables, ticks like to get underneath those things because it creates a nice warm spot for them. We're also going to be checking in the ears. Horses can also get ticks in their ears, and I'd imagine you'd need some good sedation to get them out of their ears. And then additionally, eyelids on dogs can be a place where they're going to be getting ticks. And dogs are really good about sticking their head in places to sniff and check everything out. So it's not surprising that they tend to get more ticks on their head than a horse otherwise might. The other place you're going to want to check is between the toes, because if they're walking on the grass, they could be picking up ticks that are hanging out in the grass on the pathways. So when we find ticks on our animals, we should be removing them. I didn't include any information on how to remove an unattached tick, because all you need to do is grab that sucker off of the animal before it decides to eat and go ahead and kill it, or put it in some sort of container that you can kill it in. But when we're removing attached ticks, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but ultimately the best way to do this is you're going to want to get, if you have a pair of tweezers, they do recommend having like a pointy, sharp tweezer versus a blunt end. That way you can get a lot closer to the skin. But you're going to want to grasp the tick close to the skin surface and avoid squeezing the body, especially if the tick is already engorged. Because what can happen is if you squeeze the tick, you can actually push fluid back into the skin. And what that will end up doing is, if there's any sort of disease or pathogen that tick has, you're pushing that back into the body of the host, and we're trying to avoid that. So we're trying to avoid squeezing the tick's body and just grabbing up at the head. And you're going to pull away with steady, even pressure, and you don't want to twist. When you just have your tweezers, you do not want to be twisting the head. You just want to be applying even pressure and pulling the tick away from the skin. You're going to dispose of the live tick by taking one of these steps. You're going to place it in a sealed container, wrap it in tape, flush it down the toilet, or put it in alcohol. And the alcohol that we're talking about is not your nice bourbon that you've got at home. We're talking about isopropyl alcohol. If you've got any of that, really easy to get at the store, 70% isopropyl alcohol, something that I recommend everybody have. It's great disinfectant. So I would just go ahead and make sure you've got some of that at home anyway. And then what you're going to do is you're definitely going to wash your hands, because you don't want to be dealing with ticks without washing your hands. And if the tick has bitten you, you want to make sure that you're washing the area with soap and water. You can even use that alcohol to rub the skin, or you can use hand sanitizer as well. So when we're removing ticks from horses, it's going to be a lot of the same sort of information, but we've got a lot more hair involved unless the tick that was attached to you was on your scalp. This information was provided by Comstock Equine Hospital, and what we are advised to do based on the veterinary recommendation is to pick the tick off of the horse and kill it in a jar of isopropyl alcohol. If you don't have a jar, like a little plastic container works. For a while, when we first started pulling ticks off of dogs at my last veterinary hospital, we put them in a baggie because we didn't have any jars that we could send out at the time. So any sort of container you can stick them in. Basically, what we're doing with the alcohol is we are drying them out, and that's how you're killing the tick. It's a myth that if the head gets left behind, you have to use a match. You don't have to do that. The tick is kind of one piece of grossness. So what happens sometimes is the mouth parts might get left behind if you didn't get down far enough to pull the tick off, or if they're really, really stuck in the skin. And based on my reading, it's not so much a worry about that. The skin should be able to push that out, or you can go back in with tweezers later on and try to fish out the mouth pieces. You can use tweezers, as I described in the last slide, or they make special tick removers. But oftentimes, based on all of the reading that I had done, tweezers tend to be your best bet. And it's not recommended to remove ticks with your fingers. However, most of our equine vets have removed ticks with their fingers with no problems. And I did the same with my horse when I was there last time. I just used my fingers. So there you have your, gold standard of removing the tick, and then you have your, this is really gross, I just want to get this off of my animal removal. So the best thing is just to get that tick removed from you, your horse, or your pet. When we're removing ticks from dogs and cats, you're going to do your full inspection. They tend to have longer hair depending on the breed. But you're going to also want to get as close to the skin as possible, pull up in a slow, steady motion. And what that motion does is it helps to prevent the tick's mouth from breaking off. It's not the head of the tick that's breaking off. They don't actually have a head. It's all one piece. What gets stuck in the skin is the mouth parts. So removing ticks with your fingers may result in squeezing that infectious material into the animal. And after you've removed the tick, always wash your hands and clean the bite site with rubbing alcohol, soap, water, and be sure to clean the tools that you were using as well. Some of this information is going to be redundant, but there is some important differences as we go along, and just want to make sure that I'm not setting anybody up to be in a situation where you're doing something that otherwise is not good for your animal. This information for removing the ticks off of dogs and cats was something I found from the AKC themselves. So when we've removed the tick, we can talk about submitting tick samples now. And the reason why I have even submitting tick samples on this presentation is because I reached out to the Nevada Department of Agriculture, the entomology program, and I was able to speak with the gentleman who is our head entomologist of the state. And he has informed me that at this time in the year, they've received very few tick samples, and they really rely on people submitting tick samples themselves, as a lot of their field work is something that hasn't supported them collecting a lot of ticks. So I don't know where they're looking, but if there's a particular area that has a heavier load of ticks, we should be submitting ticks to them so that we can track and see if there's a particular species surge that's occurring in northern Nevada and what steps we need to be taking to protect ourselves and our animals from these ticks. So Mr. McDowell said himself he'd certainly be interested in receiving specimens for identification to help better understand any emerging trends. So I encourage anybody who's pulling ticks off of horses to please save them, and we can have them submitted to the state, to the Nevada Department of Agriculture to track these trends. At this time, the entomology lab does not conduct pathogen testing for human or animal diseases. If you're interested in tracking diseases, you would have to go to the animal industry division at the Department of Agriculture. And they actually, since we know kind of what these ticks carry, what's more important is to know what kind of ticks we're dealing with, because then we won't have to be testing them specifically for diseases. So don't worry about every tick that you pull off needing to go in for actual testing. It's more just looking for identification of what that tick is. So traditionally, Nevada hasn't had a lot of tick pressure because it's a dry climate. However, in riparian areas like Washoe Valley or along rivers, we're going to be seeing a potential localized increase in ticks, and that can warrant additional vigilance. So if you find a tick on your horse yourself or your pet, please pull it off and put it in a jar of isopropyl alcohol that we can submit to the department. So how are we supposed to be protecting ourselves? What measures can we be taking to make sure that we are preventing tick bites for ourselves? This information was provided by Mr. McDowell. He suggests that you wear long sleeves and long pants, especially when in grassy, brushy, or wooded areas. Be sure to tuck your pants into socks or boots to limit access to skin. Use EPA-approved repellents. Over here on the side, I actually found a nice website that had done their own study on the best tick repellents for this year in particular. And they've got some suggestions on there if you're curious. I personally love Off. Smells a lot like DEET. It's mostly DEET, but I spray myself up with that when I'm going out in the woods, and knock on wood, I've never had a problem, but I'm going to buy more of it this year. So definitely be sure that you're doing something at least for yourself when you're outside in the elements. You can use permethrin to use on your clothes and your gear, but do not use that directly on your skin. It's quite toxic. And perform thorough tick checks after outdoor activity, especially for yourself. Be sure to check your scalp, behind your ears, armpits, groin, and behind the knees. There are some people who have reported riding out at Washoe Lake who have come back with ticks on them. So it's not unrealistic to think that you could also pick up a tick while you're out spending time with your horse, unfortunately, this spring. And then they always suggest to shower in case you have unattached ticks on you. It will help to knock them off and wash them down the drain. Interventions that we can be using on our horses is any pyrethrin-based spray. Most fly sprays are going to be pyrethrin-based, so you can get good coverage with that, although there are specific sprays that are specifically for tick repellent. You can do spot treatments on a horse, especially if you find that they've got lots of ticks that were attached. One of the things that Comstock had suggested was using the EquiSpot by Farnham. And you can do extra label use for severe infestations on horses using frontline spray. I would just recommend that if you don't know what to put on your horse, your dog, to contact your vet and just ask what sort of topical interventions would be best for them, especially if your horse has any sort of sensitivities to smell or topical interventions. Interventions for dogs are slightly different. We have veterinary prescribed preventatives like oral medications. I've listed just a few here: NexGard, Bravecto, Simparica. You do have to be cautious when using some of those. Some breeds tend to be more sensitive to some of these oral meds, so be sure to discuss with your vet what's best for your pet. There's topical treatments. Most of these are also not just going to be tick preventative, they're going to be flea and tick preventatives. Frontline, it tends to be good for dogs and cats. Advantix, however, is toxic for cats. So that is where it's just really important to be able to ask your vet what is best. Hey, I found a tick on my dog, my cat. What should I do next? The other thing is being able to use tick collars, but I would also just double check and make sure that it's a high quality tick collar, that it's something that your vet would recommend, because just with supply chain stuff anymore, you never know where your supplies are coming from unless you're getting them from your veterinary supplier. So once again, contact your vet if you have any questions. about what's most appropriate for your pet after you've seen or removed a tick from your animal. Now let's talk about preventative measures on our properties, because especially if you live in an area that has any sort of pine, juniper trees, sagebrush, rabbit brush, there's a chance that you might have ticks on your property. Comstock recommends that you rake away all pine needles and piles of leaves and just get rid of them. Most likely ticks are being picked up by walking in areas that have these pine and juniper trees. The ticks can also be under sagebrush and rabbit brush. For facility protection, you want to make sure that you're keeping areas cleared of debris and underbrush. And having gravel between a wooded area and a paddock makes it particularly difficult for ticks to crawl into a paddock itself. It's a good deterrent. So if you need to add some gravel to your property, it might be a good time to look into doing that. And the other thing that they suggest is keep horses in paddocks free of sagebrush and trees if you have a particular heavy load of ticks or you're noticing a lot of ticks on your property. For equine and animal protection, the state lab has suggested the following. Be sure you're conducting routine tick checks on horses. Also be sure to check around the mane, tail base, ears, and under areas of tack. Utilize your veterinary recommended topical or systemic tick control products where appropriate. Keep your pastures well managed. Keep your grasses short, reduce brush and edge habitat that comes up near your animals. You're going to want to remove leaf litter and organic debris where ticks may be hanging out. They really, really like pine needles and they like to hang out in leaves as well. You're going to want to limit exposure to wildlife reservoirs when you can. Sometimes that is impossible to do. And then you want to maintain fencing and reduce areas where wildlife can encroach into boarding facilities or into your own backyard. And then for environmental management, focus on tick prevention efforts on transition zones. So the transition zone would be where you've got different edges of like grass or tree lines or anything like that. Improve drainage where possible. Ticks really like to hang out where it's nice and moist. So we want to make sure that it's as dry as possible. They do not thrive where it's dry. And consider targeted acaricide treatments in high-risk areas. This is going to be permethrin treatments and other sort of hardcore insecticide type stuff if you do have a confirmed infestation. And with that, I want to thank you so much for listening tonight. I hope that you gained something from the tick talk. And if you have any further questions, I would like to open the floor for anybody who has those questions. And that's all I have for you guys tonight.